So,
Awesome.
thank you guys for being here. We're going to start off with from the University of Kansas, the University Daily Kansan. This is Vicky Diaz-Camacho, the editor-in-chief of the paper, and this is Katie Kutsko, who is the former editor-in-chief from last year. Thank you, guys.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Katie, and Vicky, obviously, who just introduced us.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about a couple of things. It's been a pretty big year in our newsroom, and the two things we're going to talk about are we flipped our newsroom and our production schedule, so we kind of did a digital transformation, and then the second thing we're talking about is a lawsuit that we're in. We're suing KU. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about that I really had more of a hand in this past semester. So just for background, at KU, our editor-in-chiefships are semesterly. So I was the editor last semester, and Vicky is the current editor. So just so you know that. All right, so starting in August, we decided that the Kansan Board of Directors decided to eliminate 2 printing days. So we only print 2 days a week rather than before we were printing 4 days a week. We decided to do this for a number of reasons. Those reasons include obviously money, and we also just really wanted to find a way to propel the Kansan a little bit more forward into being relevant with the university community. So when I was hired to be the editor, I wrote this plan, and I had 4 goals, and these were the goals: to have a culture shift. Obviously, every editor's goal is to make the reporting better. Align our news and business efforts, and then engage with alumni. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those things in more depth, but basically, when I say initiate a culture shift, I mean how do you make your staff feel less burnt out, and how do you keep the culture of the newsroom really creative and collaborative? And that was a big question that we wanted to address. And then we also wanted to strengthen reporting. That means when you're printing 4 papers a day, you have just you're feeding the daily beast. You're getting really bogged down. You're staying in the newsroom until 2 a.m. How do you, when you cut those printing days, how do you reformat that so that your reporting is better? And then align news and business effort. We created a position that I'll talk about later that works in between news and advertising, and then engaging with alumni and transparency. Of all the goals, goal number 4 was like the worst. That in practice did not do as well with that one as we did the other 3. Okay, so this is a little bit of the structure of the Kansan. We have pretty obvious things. I'm sure they're very relatable, but the thing that to point out is the brand manager. That is the person who works in between news and advertising, and that person helps with all things related to the Kansan brand. That means social media. They work with the marketing team to kind of promote different campaigns we have going on and that kind of thing. I can, on the schedule for the conference or the conference website, there's a list to this Medium post I wrote about all of these goals. So if you're interested in reading that, feel free to check that out. Okay. Oh, no.
It didn't show up.
It didn't show up.
It's all good.
Okay. Well, like half the text is missing. Anyway, so part of our culture shift that we really changed in the newsroom, we instead of coming in at 3 p.m. and leaving at midnight, we started coming in at 9 a.m. every day, like a normal newsroom would. And we had a morning budget meeting and an afternoon budget meeting to keep things on track. But the really important changes are we started using Slack, and if your newsroom doesn't use Slack, it should. It's awesome. It's does everybody know what it is at this point? Okay. Well, for those of you who don't, it is a communication system. It's like messaging, basically. You can have a desktop application on your Mac or your phone or your web client, whatever. And it's just, you can create all of these channels. So each section of the paper can have a different form of communication. All the editors can have private communication. You can direct message. Like, for example, the news editors, we have 2 news editors, and they will have a direct message conversation with every single reporter. That way they know what their assignments are and all of that. And then we also use Trello, which is an online project management system, and that's how we do our copy flow. You kind of drag and drop the different stories. So if you don't know what those are, I'd recommend you look them up because they're very useful and wonderful.
It showed.
Now it should. Oh, okay, sorry, I don't know how to use basic things. Okay. I already talked about this stuff. I already talked about that too.
Basically, everyone's in the newsroom throughout the day. And then for production days, they continue to stay there until midnight, 2 a.m., whenever we need to leave. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my tips, I guess, if you're something that Josh Benton said earlier this morning is something that a lot of newsrooms, like people our age, aren't doing is innovating and creating change. And one thing I would say is that like you can totally do it. All you need to do is like a lot of research and planning before you try and implement something. Some of my the Medium post I wrote about this was one tool that helped me recruit people who would be like-minded in this innovation because it shared my plan with everyone. But also just a tip that if you want to try and lead some type of change, you have to be willing to outlast everyone, meaning it's hard. It's really hard to get people on your side and to want to agree with you.
But tension is good. I think that it really builds a lot of, I don't know, you build a tough skin and then you're able to work through these problems because then you just learn so much at the end of the semester, especially for us since it's such a quick thing, you know, we're gone and then the next editor-in-chief takes charge. So it's really inspiring. But
so we're going to move on to the next part. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. But otherwise, we're going to talk about the lawsuit. Okay, so, all right. This is a little overview of what happened. In spring of 2014, we published an editorial that criticized our student government's election process, which is its own whole fiasco. But basically what happened is there are 2 student senate coalitions running to be in charge. And the one who actually got elected was, they were kind of kicked out of the race because they violated the elections code. And what they did is they bought burritos for the people that were supporting them, and that was against the rules. So they were eliminated from the race, and the people who were elected were not actually the people that the student body voted for. So we wrote an editorial, and we're like, that's actually a shadow government, and that's not really how democracy works. They didn't like that. So in retaliation, our funding was cut, and how the Kansan's funding works. We get part of our funding from student fees that the student senate gives us, but that's only part. Most of our advertising, or most of our revenue is from advertising. Most of our budget is from advertising revenue. So, yeah, and then some of the way our case has been formed is the student body president said that we bit the hand that fed us, and another former vice president said the content was problematic, yada, yada, yada. Okay, do you want to talk about this stuff now?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Well, in the lawsuit, we kind of outlined, I don't know if any of you have read it, but go for it, you know. In it, we laid it out to explain that, you know, during that meeting, one of the Senate members, they read the editorial aloud, which completely violates a content-neutral environment. When they made that decision, that was a violation of the First Amendment, and so that is why we are here. That is why we filed a federal lawsuit. So this has been an ongoing process. We have also reached out to the university chancellor. I wrote a letter myself to her, have not heard back. And so at this point, all I can say is that the lawsuit is pending, and we will know more, I don't know, soon, hopefully. But that is pretty much the deal with that. I've also written a Medium post if you're more interested in knowing what's going on, why it's affected us. We cut 13 positions, which is a huge loss. And we're also unable to hire an editorial advisor. So we have no one to be there for us, to be a sounding board, to help us through difficult situations. We are student journalists. We don't have that direction. So that's kind of what we're dealing with at this point. And there's a little excerpt of the letter. So I don't have anything further, but if you have questions, please go ahead.
I think we actually need to, if we can do questions after,
Sure.
if you want to find people afterwards, you guys should feel free to. But I think let's give these guys a hand.
Thank you.